Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Thanks for joining another installment of our series, Meet the Mayor. And today we're delighted to be joined by a terrific mayor from Champaign, just downstate from us, Deborah Frank Feinen, who's been the mayor since 2015. Mayor has a very interesting background, long connection to Champaign, has lived there for more than 45 years. Went to college out east in Mount Holybrook, and then as an undergrad, then she went to law school in Chicago at Chicago Kent. She's had a really interesting and varied career in the public and private sector. In terms of the public sector, she was on the Champaign County Board for 14 years, on Champaign City Council for 9 years, and then was elected mayor in 2015 and again in 2019. So we're really eager to hear about her connection to Champaign, the challenges and opportunities Champaign faces, and as another community here in Carbondale that is connected so closely to university, we thought it'd be particularly interesting to understand the dynamic between the city of Champaign and the University of Illinois. So looking forward to a great conversation. So Mayor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, so you've spent most of your life in Champaign. Tell us about growing up there, and then also talking about your decision to go out east to study as an undergrad. I think you studied psychology there.
Psychology and education at Mount Holyoke. Growing up, we moved to Champaign so my dad could go to law school. So that was our connection. He was offered his first job out of law school in Champaign, and we stayed. And so we really have been there since I was about 3 or 4 years old, and, went to our local schools and, just really took advantage of living in a university community. All of the things on campus that are available to young students that, from your experience in your community as well, certainly provides a bigger feel than East Central Illinois may otherwise provide when you have the university around. Went away to law school, went away to college and then law school, mostly because I felt like I needed to get out of my hometown and, live a little bit without my parents being 10 minutes away. But moved back for my final year of law school and actually ran for county board. As I was graduating from law school, I was also being sworn in as a county board member.
And as I understand it, your particular interest in law focus is real estate and estate planning. Is that right?
So yes and no. When I got out of law school, I actually worked for the Illinois Pollution Control Board. So I did a lot of environmental law and policy for about 7 or 8 years. But I currently work, I'm an operations manager for a title company. And so I am focused on, the business side of things, but also real estate law.
Well, I need to talk for a second about the Illinois Pollution Control Board,
Yeah.
because as I understand it, that's where you met your husband, which is not necessarily the place we think of the starting point for romances. He was, I think, an attorney for the EPA, Illinois EPA. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. He appeared before me in a hearing. I was a hearing officer. It was water quality regulation, something very sexy and exciting. And anyway, he appeared in front of me and then had some mutual friends in the Champaign area. He was living in Springfield and he was spending a lot of time in Champaign. So we got to know each other that way.
Great. Well, let's talk about your first stint then on you're on the county board for, I think, 14 years. What sort of issues did you grapple with? What was interesting about that political challenge and governmental challenge for you?
So, the county board was a great training ground because it's very easy when you're living in the center of the city of Champaign to really think only in an urban sense. And the county board, when I was on it, was actually dominated by our rural members. And so I learned a lot about the fact that our county that agriculture drives so much of our county and is actually a huge employer and a huge economic engine. And it's something you sort of know because you're in corn country and bean country. But I was a city kid, did a little bit of horseback riding, but that was about the extent of it. And you really got to know the issues for those rural families. And that, county board for them was their city council. It was their government, sort of the closest to them. We had control over road maintenance and bridge maintenance, which is a really big issue. But the county runs the court system and the Humane Society and the nursing home at the time. So I learned a lot about compromise and working with other people. When I was first on county board, I was at that time the youngest member, not the youngest member to ever serve, but I was the youngest member of the board at the time I served. And I was one of just a handful of women. And so navigating that and getting middle-aged white rural farmers to trust me, it took a bit of time, but eventually I became vice chair of the county board. I don't regret a minute of the time that I served there. I think the only thing I really disliked was the partisan nature of the board. City council is nonpartisan, county board is partisan, and it was at times ugly partisan. And, I was much more interested in voting for things for good government reasons than because it was a Republican or a Democratic choice to vote a certain way.
It's interesting because you usually typically think of the sort of the kind of mechanics of life, roads and bridges and all, as being a nonpartisan issue. I mean, how did that get ensnared into partisan politics?
We had a lot of appointments. There were appointments for, drainage district commissioners, and there would be, pushes for folks with an environmental background or for folks with a Farm Bureau background or, people who had newly moved into the drainage area as opposed to the farm family that'd been on that ditch for 100 years. Practices on clear cutting and, poisoning the weeds versus doing other kinds of maintenance on the ditches. It was all about their livelihood, right? It was how those farm families were surviving, but it could be really partisan and nasty. There were, discussions about different budget items. The county board, we have a 377 board and a mental health board. So a developmental disabilities board and a mental health board that received tax dollars and had their own levies that were set by the county. There could be people who wanted to set the levy at zero and didn't think those services were necessary. So there were certainly partisan issues on the county board. I think city council can be a little bit that way, but because we're nonpartisan to start out with, and then you're mostly dealing with things like, fire, police, public works, that tends to be, as you said, nonpartisan. We are starting to dip our toe into social services, and that can be more of a partisan issue and more controversial.
Well, so let's talk about the transition to the city council, and you were served on it from, I think, 2006 to 2015 as just a regular member. What were the your takeaways from that experience? What was most engaging to you
when I became a city council member?
Yeah, as a city council member.
I think the reason I switched was that I had been redistricted in the county board, and I was no longer really representing people other than right in my neighborhood from the city of Champaign. I was representing folks that were, mostly farm and rural communities that lived pretty far out from me. And what I like about local government is being stopped at the grocery store to have a conversation about what's going on, and getting input and making decisions that way about things that directly impact your friends and neighbors. And so for me, switching to county or from county board to city council continued that. The city is incredibly well run. Some of it is that it has more funding than the county ever had when I was on the county board. But there is a professionalism in the corporate city structure that I really appreciated. They did things like, they would teach new council members, you do a whole orientation session, and you go to all the city departments and you meet with a city attorney. There's a very set budget process and procedure. There's procedures for council members to get items on agendas. And so the structure is really nice, and I think lends itself to better decision making.
Well, you were elected mayor in 2015, and I read in one interview, someone, I think it was maybe a couple of years later, asked you what was most surprising about being mayor, and you said that you initially thought it was kind of a council member, plus, but you found out that it was a more different than that it involved, a lot more, working with staff, kind of coalition building. Talk about the transition from just a regular city council member to mayor, and what the challenges were in that.
I think you have it exactly right. I mean, it is a different position. And it was hard to imagine because we have a city manager form of government. And so the mayor really is just one vote on council. I get to run the meetings and I get the authority of being the mayor, but I don't really have anything more than that as far as voting power. But you quickly realize the community sees you as the leader, that you are more involved in the day-to-day with the staff and helping to liaise between council and staff, and working on issues and votes and making sure votes are lined up on things that you care about. It's just a completely different role. And I think I had been in public service for, I don't know, almost 20 years, and, could go to the grocery store and talk to some people, but I was pretty much unrecognized, right? The day you become mayor, people start stopping you no matter where you are to talk to you about things. And it's really fun, but it was surprising because it wasn't like I hadn't been elected before. And so it took some getting used to that, people recognized you everywhere.
Well, I was looking at your website, and I want to read a couple of sentences and maybe have.
Oh gosh, is it even still up?
Well, yeah, it is.
Is this an old Champaign website? Or
No, this
website?
is this is the city of Champaign.
Oh, okay.
Website.
All right.
Yeah, no, so
Okay.
no campaign pledges. No, but just the city's website. It says the city council sets the vision for the city and adopts guiding principles and goals to reflect that vision and guide decision making at all levels of city government. The city manager uses the city council's vision, principles, and goals to set priorities, direct work activities, and allocate staffing and financial resources. When I read that, I wrote down in my notes, what about the mayor? So when it says the city council sets the vision, is that just sort of a kind of code for saying the 8 members of the city council and the mayor, or?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because I am one vote. We talk in the city of Champaign all the time about the power of 5. You can't get anything done without 4 other council members agreeing with you. And that's true whether you're the mayor or you're an at-large council member or you're a district council member. So yeah, that's pretty much used interchangeably. The mayor is a member of council. I vote with them. I don't vote. I mean, I vote last, but I don't have a veto. I don't have any special privileges or powers.
Well, you've made a couple references to grocery store visits, and let me just ask. I mean, it's funny because in talking to mayors, I mean, they all tell the story of going out to get a gallon of milk and coming back 2 hours later and having to explain to the family where they've been. But after a while, people know that you've been buttonholed. So now when you go to a grocery store, say even over this past Thanksgiving weekend, what are the questions your constituents ask you? What are the concerns they express?
You know, what I have learned is that people tend to be aware of the things that directly impact them. That's not to say they aren't aware of citywide issues, but it's the pothole on your street or the broken sidewalk on your street or on your walk that you notice and that you want to talk about. And so I get a lot of those kind of maintenance kinds of questions. The city of Champaign, like, you know, many larger cities post-pandemic, had gun violence issues going on. Our gun violence has dropped by about 46% in this last year. That's due to a whole lot of factors that we can talk about. But, you know, that's still fresh on people's minds. And so people want to know what we're doing and, you know, what's available in our community. And so we have a lot of discussions about that. During the summer, it's, you know, questions about Street Fest or other things that are going on at the city and you know, just day-to-day things. I think a lot of people, I always laugh that I am the mayor answer lady. So if you don't know where it fits in local government, you email the mayor or you stop the mayor or you call the mayor, and we get you connected to where you need to be. People don't always realize we have a separate park district, we have a separate school district, those kinds of things.
Well, let's talk about the gun issue, because I know that on the city council's website, on its top goals, the first one is keep the community safe, and it refers to deterring gun violence. And I went back and I saw when you ran in 2015, you were asked what, you know, your top priority was, and you said addressing the violence that is occurring in the city and surrounding areas. So talk a little bit more about just what exactly the problem is and what you've been able to do to combat it.
You know, the problem, I think, is one that has grown in many more urban cities post-pandemic. You know, I look back on what I was worried about in 2015, and certainly significant and important, but we had no idea what would be happening in 2020 and 2021. It was awful. And, you know, we have worked incredibly hard. We had some programs in place starting in about 2015, but never had adequate funding, I would say, to really make huge dents in what we needed to be doing. The ARPA funding has really provided a great opportunity. We have about $8 million worth of funding over, you know, a 2-year period that we are spending on anti-poverty programs and programs that are trauma and resiliency programs, you know, aimed at offenders, violence interruption. You know, we've hired some security forces for downtown because we were short police officers for a while. We also have, on the non-social services end, we had lost a lot of police officers to attrition and retirement. The hope, and I don't want to jinx it, I'm knocking on wood, is that by the end of the year, we will actually be fully staffed again with officers, and that makes a big difference. Some of that is we have a new chief that we got our union contracts settled. We have a new chief in place, so people weren't wondering who they were going to work for. And, you know, we also have changed some of our hiring, how we look at the police list, and we're doing continuous hiring instead of having sort of a quarterly hiring with the list. So we have made some changes that I think are making a difference. So we've got the policing side and the social services side, and we have a chief who is very supportive of the social services side as well, and sees that as two sides of the same coin. So, we've done a lot of work over the last year or so. Our council moved goals on ARPA funding really quickly. Like September, October of last year, we had goals together. And by this time of last year, we had our violence prevention blueprint done and approved by council in December of last year. And you can find that on our website. It's a great document that kind of walks through all the things we're spending money on. And we also funded license plate readers. That has helped. And we have Raven, which is basically shot spotter equipment going. It went up like this month in one of our neighborhoods that is one of our most hit by gun violence. So it's a long answer, probably more than you wanted, but we're doing a lot of work on that front.
No, I mean, it's so important in almost all communities in the state. And I noticed one kind of fun program you have is called Coffee with a Cop, building relationships one cup at a time. Tell us about how that works.
That is really done by our PIO and the police department, but they go out to various coffee shops all over town. So we rotate where we go, and they just sit for a couple hours. So we'll buy you a cup of coffee and you can come and just talk to the officers who are present. The chief is present. Usually the leadership team, the deputy chiefs are there as well, but officers kind of rotate through as they have time to do that. And it's just a chance for citizens to come in and talk with officers. It's a great program.
Well, a couple other programs that you mentioned quite a bit in your remarks. One is the Goal Getters program. What is that?
So Goal Getters started, pre-pandemic, maybe 2018. And it was us with our Unit 4 school district. There were a group of kids that we were really worried about surviving the summer. We thought they were likely to either be shot or be one of the shooters. They were identified as kids really high risk. And so kind of on the fly, the school district and the city put together a program aimed at teaching leadership skills and community skills to this group of young men. And it was wildly successful that first summer, and we decided we couldn't just drop those kids because it was the start of the school year. And so the program then was funded to continue, and it continues to this day. Kids are identified and referred into the program, and it really grows community leaders. We're not always successful. These are kids with a lot going on in their lives for a variety of reasons, but we have had several success stories. I've been part of raising funds that we have placed at our Champaign-Urbana Schools Foundation to help fund scholarships for kids who are going on to college. And we have done that. We've, donated out scholarship money. We have one of our young men owns a landscaping business locally and has purchased his first house. He's one of our older kids who was one of our initial kids. But we've had a lot of success, and there are some really hardworking people at the district to make that happen.
Another program you describe is CU Fresh Start. Talk about that.
So Fresh Start is a program that was started to basically same thing. We identified people likely to be involved in the gun violence, and it was modeled after the Don't Shoot book by David Kennedy, if anybody has read that. And it's a program that was used in Peoria and then in Chicago a little bit, but it's been used nationwide. And basically it's the simple thing is sort of a scared straight. They are required to come because they may be on probation or facing some other kind of legal issue. So we can get them to come, and then there's a group of community leaders and community members that talk to these individuals about what the impact of gun violence is in our community. There are community members who also attend the meeting. It's closed to the public though. And then they are offered services. So we have a counselor who can help provide services, help people with job applications or getting a driver's license, or just all the various things that people may need. And their choice is be part of the program. We will try to help you. Or as the state's attorney always promises during the meetings, if you choose to pick up a gun, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. But here is this opportunity to change your life if you'd like to.
Well, let's talk about Champaign and the University of Illinois. And I know your community is about 89,000, 10th largest, I believe, in the state of Illinois. You have about 14,000 employees from the U of I, but of course its effect on the community is, well beyond that number. Talk about the University of Illinois and how you interact with it and how it fits into your community.
So what I would say is how we interact with the university is forever changed by the pandemic. So we all knew each other and worked together on various things. Before the pandemic, we would meet, the city manager and I would meet quarterly or maybe biennially with the chancellor, and we all would come together as needed. Because of the pandemic, we began regularly meeting. I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, we were meeting almost daily, and at least weekly through most of the pandemic. We had a lot of shared issues, right? How the students' health impacted our community as a whole, how our community might impact the students, how our local bars being open might impact everybody. And so we work together in a way that I am, to this day, incredibly proud of, not to mention that the University of Illinois developed the SHIELD test, which allowed everybody to do the saliva testing on a daily basis, and then eventually open that up to our community as a whole. I felt like I was in the safest community in the world by being in Champaign-Urbana during the pandemic. And the partnerships that we built now transcend everything. We work together in a way that I couldn't have imagined or ever dreamed of. But it's because we built those trust relationships and we worked together through that awful time.
I was in Champaign in August attending an Edgar Fellows event. I know you were Edgar Fellows alum. And the one thing I was struck by, I had not really appreciated the research park, which is out by the I Hotel and the Assembly Hall, is, has almost a who's who of, high-tech companies, cutting-edge companies there. Talk about that research park and how that kind of revives and helps your economy.
So the research park, if all of the companies were one company, would be our third largest employer. That's the dramatic impact it has on our community. And it helps us retain people, right? Because one of the things that happens to us is that, students learn a whole lot here and then they graduate and they want to go on to another community sometimes. What the research park does is help us retain that talent here. And so they are an amazing part of our community. The development of the research park was a partnership with the university and the city of Champaign. We continue to partner on, just the buildings being built out there, or, whether it's fixing the roads, the I Hotel itself. We did a tax break where basically they got to keep some of their hotel motel tax dollars for a period of time in order to pay for the hotel to be built, because it was, a necessary component with the research park. So the city is very invested in their success, but it has been tremendous success.
Well, tell us about your relationship with Urbana. I know Champaign was once called West Urbana. Tell us about how the two communities interact. I mean, to what extent is there some rivalry? To what extent is there collaboration? Talk about that.
Well, have you seen our t-shirts? So you can go to chambanaproud.com and you can buy a t-shirt that either says Team Champaign Urbana or Team Urbana Champaign. Proceeds are going to our local historical museum. You tend to say Urbana Champaign if you're university connected, but otherwise we know it's Champaign Urbana. We have a lot of friendly rivalry. I have the benefit, Diane Marlin, who's the mayor in Urbana, is the wife of John Marlin, who was my boss at the Illinois Pollution Control Board. And so I have known her and her family really since I've been a professional. And so we work incredibly well together. One of the benefits of having her is having somebody else, particularly during the tough times, who understands what it's like to be a mayor, and having somebody that close that you can meet for a coffee or a beer is really nice, or text at 10 o'clock at night. It's been great to have her. We like the university community and some others. We worked together almost daily during the pandemic. And so although we already had a good relationship, it certainly is strengthened these days. We believe, and I think she does as well, that a rising tide lifts all ships. So yes, there is competition, and we would prefer to have the new business in Champaign or whatever the growth opportunity is in Champaign. We recognize that if Urbana is not strong, we are not either. And so we want them to succeed.
Well, how has Champaign changed over the 45 years or so that you live there? What are the most discernible changes in the community?
I would say downtown and campus town. So if you're a University of Illinois grad, or you have been here, because you had a high school wrestling tournament or, football or whatever it may be, if you haven't been here in 10 years, I would say that downtown and campus town are probably unrecognizable to you. When I first got on council, we were in maybe the second phase we have a Boneyard Creek, and we have had drainage issues. You used to be able to, during heavy rain, float your car down Green Street, which is our campus town main street, like a boat. And over the years, council has chipped away at fixing that drainage issue. Mayor before me, Mayor Dan McCollum, he put in place a sales tax percentage that would go toward drainage projects. That made a huge difference. Since I've been on council, we've had a stormwater utility fee implemented so that we could also pay for drainage projects. And we are slowly chipping away at those. But because we did the campus town drainage projects, we were able to get some primary areas in campus town off the FEMA floodplain maps, which then allowed for incredible reinvestment and economic development in our downtown or our campus town area. Our downtown really got turned around with streetscape, which really we need to renew. It's been probably 20 years now, and it's time to rejuvenate it. But we did streetscape. They allowed outdoor cafes, and suddenly our downtown just boomed. We also had a limited number of liquor licenses, and anybody who invested more than $500,000 was able to get a liquor license in the downtown area, and that made a big difference as well. So those two areas have changed dramatically. There's been a lot of housing growth as well, and we have kind of pushed out to the west, but I would say campus town and downtown are our biggest changes.
What would surprise many Illinoisans about Champaign? Is there an aspect or aspects of life in Champaign that maybe people do not particularly perceive or anticipate?
I would say that we have people from about 143 different countries who call Champaign Urbana home. And you forget sometimes when you're living here how lucky we are to live in such a multinational, multicultural community. It has really it impacts, the things we teach in our schools and the opportunities for students. And it, with things like the Crane Art Center for Performing Arts, you really have the flavor of living in a large city, but you're living in a city that's 90,000 people.
And I see the use of the term micro-urban community. Is that what that pertains to?
It is, yeah, for sure.
As you think about the job of mayor, what is the best part? What is the most challenging?
So I think the best part are the things that we've talked about. It's really the interaction with the public. For me, I am an extrovert that gets a lot of energy from the people around me. And so being able to make a difference in the community that I call home and that I love, and to help people and talk to people is fantastic. I just love it. I always said pre-pandemic anyway, that it was the best job in the world and that everybody really ought to be able to experience it, to understand what it's like. I think the most challenging is that you feel the responsibility for everything that's going on, even though you really don't have, you have the ability to impact it, but it's not like, I am not a strong mayor form of government. I can't change the budget by myself. I can't, come up with a new initiative and do it all on my own. It all is something that takes, the entire council or 4 other people and the city manager to get done. I think people don't understand city manager form of government. And so that can be a challenge as well. People expect you as the mayor and the head of the city to be able to wave your magic wand, and you can't always do that.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that you've developed a podcast, and tell us about the genesis of that and just the range of topics. I've listened to a couple of the shows, but boy, everything from the African American Heritage Trail to Hedge Park, the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, the American Rescue Act. Tell us about how it developed and how you try to use the podcast to communicate to your constituents.
So I'll be honest, it was developed out of competition with Urbana. Because, Urbana was doing a great job with some of their social media and some other things. And we were trying to figure out, what's the channel to get our information out as well. I liked the longer form so that I could really have the opportunity to talk to people about the issues, whatever the issue was that we were talking about. During the pandemic, it evolved, right? We did it really initially as just a podcast, and then everybody started doing Zoom and Teams and all of the things. And we realized it could really be an on-air interview that we could record then with video if people wanted the video. And it's a chance for people to learn a little bit more about what's going on in different areas of the city. But I'm going to go off topic for a minute because you mentioned the Hedge Park, and that is my absolute favorite project of this year. It is, I just love it. And that came out of, I was chosen for the Mayor's Institute on City Design. It's a through U.S. Conference of Mayors. You go and you work with architects and engineers, and you really spend about 4 or 5 days doing, you pick a project from your city and you talk about the mayor's ability to really drive planning and development and what your role is in doing that. And because I was an alum of MICD, during the pandemic, they did Zoom lunchtime, just seminars, webinars. And I was on one where there was a woman who had worked for New York City, and she had developed just little parks and development that you could do in struggling neighborhoods that would help change the neighborhood. And the format was called Safe Spaces, Active Places. And so I challenged our staff to work on that for one of our hardest hit, both economically and with the gun violence neighborhoods in the city of Champaign. Got 4 other council members to sign on for a study session, and they came up with a hedge pop park. And the park was built very quickly over the course of a summer. We got it up and running. We programmed it. So there was Mother Goose on the Loose, which is through our public library. We had RC cars that kids were building and also running on a track. The track was donated by one of our local developers. We had a STEAM bus that is through a University of Illinois professor that would come out and teach STEAM and STEM classes. He was out with the RC cars. There was the Hip Hop Express. He also had equipment for DJs in his bus. And we had basketball and, you know, other things going on there, but it was fantastic. And our staff worked like crazy, and they programmed the space. We had cleared the space for a drainage project that isn't going to happen for several years. And it was going to sit empty and gather trash. And instead, we provided a space for that neighborhood to come together. It was a fantastic summer.
And I read someplace where this park won an Advancing Diversity and Social Change Award, either
They did.
last year or this year.
They did this year, yeah. Our planning department did an amazing job. They were fantastic. And we are not a Parks and Recs department. We are not a park district. They just pulled it off.
Well, you made no reference to a study session, and I noticed in going through the city's website, you know, their regular city council meetings and their periodic study sessions. What are these? Are these just kind of more informal opportunities to kind of do a deep dive on a narrower topic, or what is the purpose of these?
That's exactly right. So study session is for staff to get input from council as they're developing a project or an ordinance. And so they'll come with kind of, here's the outline of what we're thinking about, and take input from council. Or if it's something that they think might be controversial, they get an idea of, you know, are there enough council members to even pursue it moving forward? And so it's really an opportunity for input.
Well, 2023 is almost upon us, and I believe it's an election year in Champaign. Have you decided if you're going to run for re-election?
I am running. I filed a little bit over a week ago.
What would you like to do in the next term? Do you have a particular set of issues you really want to focus on?
I do. You know, I talked about the $8 million that we are spending in ARPA funding for essentially social services programs. The University of Illinois is evaluating that for us, and they are going to help us determine either what programs need to be tweaked, which ones are working, which ones are not. And then from there, we have the challenge of finding ongoing funding for the programs that are necessary in our community. And so I see as really my driver over the next 4 years is identifying those programs, making sure that they are built into the city budget so that, you know, moving forward, they become a part of city government. And, you know, we traditionally do not do very many social services programs, and we're still not, we're funding them, we're not providing them ourselves. But over the next 4 years, and you know, we have about 2 years where we will have the funding, we are going to have to work hard to get that identified and done. So that I think is important to set up whoever may be the next mayor after me going forward.
Well, I'd like to ask our guests, you know, we have students on this call, and ask them what have they learned in their professional careers that maybe you wish you would have known when you started out, or what you might suggest students think about as they kind of think about their careers and look to the future. What have you learned?
I think I have learned that it's okay to change. Who I was when I started, and believe it or not, I've now hit 30 years as an elected official. And who I was when I started is certainly not who I am today. I think the work changes you, and you'd be silly to think it doesn't. And that you have to be true to yourself, but it is okay to admit that you see the world differently, or that the world is different, and that it requires a different way of thinking about solving the problems. And that was hard for me. I felt like people had elected me expecting something very specific, and deviating from that took some strength and soul searching.
Are there any particular issues where you think your evolution has been like most dramatic? I mean, is there anything that comes to mind?
I think I am much more attuned to the fact that we need to see our community holistically. When I first got on council, we were fire, police, and public works, and that was the role of city government. And not our problem if the kids aren't doing well in school, or social services are needed, or they're homeless people, because we are to provide fire, police, and public works. And the recognition that our community strength is in our people, and that if our people are struggling, we are not doing well as a community, even if we have the shiniest fire trucks out there, and no potholes, was something that over time I have learned. And I'm really proud of the work that the city council and our city manager and staff are doing to really make a difference in the lives of the people who live in the city of Champaign.
Great. Well, finally, I noted that one of your interests is photography. Is there a part of Champaign that you particularly like to photograph, or maybe even parts of the region? Or tell us about your interest in photography.
That's an interesting question. My favorite spot in Champaign is our Boneyard 2nd Street Reach. That's one of the areas that was developed as we fixed our drainage problems on campus. And I love that area. It's a park, but it's actually a city park. And I love taking photographs there. If I have friends who ask me sometimes to take pictures of families or things. But most of my photography in the last probably 10 years has been kids sports, or kids, drama on stage or other things. So that's where I am in my life, I guess.
Well, interesting, just in preparing for this interview, the one thing I learned, this is a total unrelated fact, that Bob Dylan wrote at least one and perhaps two songs about Champaign. Is that part of the city lore?
Yes, and the old 97s have a song called Champaign, Illinois. So.
Okay. Is that the town anthem, or probably the Illinois fight song, I suspect? Huh?
Yeah, right. It is the Illinois fight song for sure.
Great. Well, Mayor, thank you so much. This was really a terrific conversation, and we would love at some point to invite you down to Carbondale and look at our community. I'm sure Mayor Henry would love to see you and show you around, and we'd love to show you around the Institute and Carbondale, and also hope to visit Champaign again. It's I've been there, as I said, this in August, and I was really impressed with kind of the energy and vibrancy of the community.
Well, I will see you when you're here for Edgar Fellows next. And I was there for the eclipse, and I'm sure I will be back again, but I'd love to come in between.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And thanks to all of you for watching another edition of Meet the Mayor. We will have this video on our website in the coming days. Please show it to family and friends. And thank you for supporting the Institute and keeping the memory of Paul Simon alive and well. Thanks so much.